So, how many of you are ready for Christmas? Now, ready can mean two things when it comes to Christmas, right? Ready can mean like I can't wait for it to get here, but it can also mean like I've bought all the presents, all the decorating's done. So some of you, when you heard it, you thought, heck no, I'm not ready. There's so much to do. But some of you, maybe if you're like I'm ready. I don't care if the presents are bought. I don't care what decorations are up. I am ready, and I've been that way since I was a kid. Christmas is all about the wait, isn't it? It is. Christmas kind of equals waiting. It's one thing that's true of Christmas is that it takes forever to get here, right? It does. When we're children, we kind of measure time by how long it is until our birthday and how long it is till Christmas. So our oldest son was born on December 19th, so he's got just a few days between his birthday and Christmas, and he doesn't yet realize that when he gets older, that'll cost him. At this point, it doesn't really. For me, Christmas as a child was always worth the wait. It was always worth it, okay? Now, maybe you weren't that way. Maybe you had a lot different childhood than I did, and mine wasn't, mine wasn't a wealthy childhood, but it was always worth the wait. And because it always came. Christmas always came. It always came on December 25th. Now, don't get me wrong. Is there a worse feeling in the world than December 26th? No, there's not. There's not. You wake up and you're like, it's over. It's over. And some of you do Christmas gatherings after the 25th, and you know they don't feel the same. They don't. They kind of lose the luster. Christmas always seemed to be worth the wait, and it always came. We're talking about hope for the next 3 weeks, okay? A wait is bearable when there's hope, right? It's when there's no hope that things change. Proverbs 13:12 says this, hope delayed makes the heart sick. Can I get a witness on that? But desire fulfilled is a tree of life. When we lose hope, honestly, just simply put, we can't stand the wait. The wait becomes unbearable, and wait takes on another spelling and another meaning, doesn't it? And it begins to weigh us down. Today, I want us to look at hope for the waiting. We're opening this series on the hope of Christmas, looking at a couple who waited. We're going to go to the book of Luke, chapter 1. So if you got a Bible and want to turn there, or if you're using an app, go right ahead and get there. Luke, chapter 1. And we're going to start in verse 5. We're looking at a couple who waited, and they hoped, and they waited, and they hoped, and they waited some more. Here's what it says starting in verse 5. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. He was a member of the priestly order of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also from the priestly line of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commands and regulations. They had no children because Elizabeth was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. So Zechariah and Elizabeth had been hoping for a child, waiting for a child. They wanted a child. The way that we know that they had wanted a child, other than the verses we're going to see in a few moments, is that everyone wanted a child. They had no children. It says the reason they had no children was what? Not because they just decided not to. She was unable to. That means they tried. They wanted them. They were faithful in God's presence. It said they were careful to obey all of his commands. They were people who prayed and hoped and waited. And no child had come, and now they were both very old. Don't miss this. The Bible says they were both very old, but it also says that in spite of the waiting, they never gave up being faithful. Remember what it says in verse 6. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. How many of us could that be said of? Oh, Carrie and Sarah, they're righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey. Most of us say, okay, I try. I don't know if I'm careful to. They were blameless. They did everything right. They followed the rules. They showed up for work. He was of the priestly order, and so was she. She came from the same line. They grew up as preachers' kids and then went into the ministry. They did everything right, and yet their prayers went unanswered. They waited and they hoped, but they always stayed faithful. And here's the thing, their faithfulness was based on a promise that had been given to Abraham about 2,000 years earlier. Not 2,000 years from now, 2,000 years from then. Like over 4,000 years ago, this promise was given to Abraham. And here's how that promise went. It's in Genesis 12. You don't have to jump there. It's on the screen. He says this, God says this to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. And all the families on earth will be blessed through you. God had promised this to Abraham, and they believed that promise. And here's the thing. At this point, some of this promise has happened. It's been fulfilled, but some of it hasn't. Were they made into a nation? Yeah, they were made into a great nation. If you read through the Old Testament, when God delivers them, when he begins to take them into the promised land and he gives them victory after victory over foes that would outnumber them and outpower them, they became great. It actually says that when they would approach some cities, the kings would quake in fear. They had become a great nation. But then he says this part about, I will bless those who bless you, curse those who treat you with contempt. I'm not sure about that one. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. Has that one happened yet? You have to realize this. When this is being told to us from Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 5, Israel's a nation that had been great, but that had been then overrun many times. It had changed hands. People had invaded, taken them over dozens of times at this point. They're ruled by these people, they're ruled by these people, they're ruled by these people, and at this time they're ruled by Rome. But every day, when it was their day, they got up and they went to the temple and they served faithfully. And they didn't do that for no reason at all. They did it because they still believed in the promise. Just because God hasn't fulfilled the promise yet doesn't mean that he won't fulfill it at all. They believed. The world they were living in was one where their nation was conquered. And many of their people, the Jewish people, had given up hope. They had turned away. But the story doesn't stop there. Verse 8. One day Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priests, he was chosen by lot to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. While the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. While Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, and this is what all angels say, don't be afraid, Zechariah. When an angel appears, they always have to tell you not to be afraid because they're always afraid. So if you ever come to me and say, I saw an angel, and I say, how was it? And you go, it was awesome, we hung out, no. If you don't tell me you were quaking with fear, I'm not buying that it was like a real deal angel, okay? Something else going on. Don't be afraid, Zechariah. And then he says this, God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John. Okay, you heard my prayer. Which one exactly did you hear? Was it the one that we prayed when we got married when we were 18? Or was it the one we prayed in our mid-20s when we still didn't have a child? Which prayer was it, God? Was it the one that we prayed in our early 30s? Or maybe it was the prayer that we prayed, we still pray in our 40s. I mean, why not? We got nothing to lose, right? We even prayed through our 50s. We laugh sometimes, but we prayed. Was it that prayer you heard? You will have great joy, verse 14, and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the eyes of the Lord. He must never touch wine or other alcoholic drinks. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. And he will turn many Israelites to the Lord their God. He will be a man with the spirit and power of Elijah. He will prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and he will cause those who are rebellious to accept the wisdom of the godly. Many had turned away. Many had given up hope. And honestly, even though they stayed faithful, Zechariah and Elizabeth, honestly, they may have given up hope on this particular dream and hope in their life, this particular desire, because they're both very old now. you're going to be filled with joy. And not just you, but the whole nation. And he's going to turn many back. Verse 18, Zechariah said to the angel, how can I be sure this will happen? I'm an old man now, and my wife is also well along in years. Very, very diplomatic response there, right? I'm old, and she's not as young as she used to be. Not as old as me. I'm old. Then the angel said, I'm Gabriel. Okay, do you have this conversation with the angel that you were just quaking in fear? He did. He was incredibly honest and vulnerable in this moment. How can I be sure? I'm old, and my wife is also, she's also kind of a little bit, she's well along in years. I'm Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God. It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. For my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why he was taking so long. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Then they realized from his gestures and his silence that he must have seen a vision in the sanctuary. I don't know how this game of charades went, but he couldn't tell them what happened. And somehow he acts it out to the point where everybody goes, oh, you saw, I think he's saying it was an angel. Oh, it was an angel. It was a vision. When Zechariah's week of service in the temple was over, he returned home. Soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for 5 months. How kind the Lord is, she exclaimed. He has taken away my disgrace of having no children. How kind he is. Yes, I've prayed and I've prayed and I've waited and I've waited and I've had hope and I've lost hope and I've held on to hope and I've clung to hope and I've lost it again. And I'm old now and this isn't at all like I thought things were going to go, but how kind the Lord is, because he has removed my disgrace of having no children. How can we, like they, have hope in the waiting? We can have hope in the waiting by trusting God's timing. Verse 20, but now since you didn't believe what I said, you'll be silent, unable to speak until the child is born, for my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. The proper time. In some translations, it actually says the appointed time. So you're telling me, Gabriel, hold on. I know you got stuff to do. Hold on. You're telling me that God had an appointed and proper time for this all along? Zechariah, the Lord has heard your prayer. Some of you would be satisfied with that. Not even that God's going to answer your prayer, but just knowing he heard. Hey, I heard you. Because you feel like, man, my prayers, I'm praying, but they're not making it past the ceiling. I don't think they're getting anywhere. We have to trust God's timing. Isaiah 40:31 says, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. On the King James Version it says, but they that wait upon the Lord, they wait, they'll renew their strength. You're going to walk and not faint. You're not going to give up. 2 Peter 3:8, but do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. I've been waiting forever. No, we haven't. The proper time, the appointed time, God's timing. They don't realize, I don't think quite yet in this moment, but God is setting into action a plan that he had begun many years before. Lamentations 3:25 and 26. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. We have to trust God's timing in the wait. We have to believe that he has heard our prayers. How can I trust him? How can I know? Even Zechariah, in the moment when it seems that the promise is going to be fulfilled, when it seems that his prayer is going to be answered, he goes, how can I know for sure this is going to happen? And honestly, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, why would you question an angel? But here's what he knows. He's got to go home and tell Elizabeth this prophecy. Hey, Elizabeth, you're going to have a baby. And she's going to ask him the same question. How do I know for sure? How can I know? And he's signing it to her. This is how you know. I can't speak. The angel, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's at God's purpose time, his appointed time, the proper time. God is doing something so much bigger than us, even when he is working in us, if we will trust his timing. Because if it is not in God's timing, it is not in God's will. We can force it on our own and try to make it happen on our own, but that is not of God. They're believing in a promise that was made to Abraham, but if they were to go back and read the story, they would see that Abraham got impatient in the wait. He tried to make it happen on his own, caused all kinds of havoc in his life. We have to trust God's timing. We can hope in the waiting by trusting God's timing. We can maintain our hope in the waiting by remembering God's promises. They never forgot the promise that God made Abraham. They never forgot, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. I'm going to bless all people through you. And they're living in a time where they're invaded, they're occupied by Rome. And how could we be a blessing to anybody? We can't do anything without getting permission from Rome. Well, if God said that he was going to do it, then he just hasn't done it yet. They remembered the promise and they stayed faithful. They never stopped believing. 2 Peter 1, 3 through 4, by his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know him, the one who called us to himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence. And because of his glory and excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share his divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. God has promised us. He has made us promises. We can maintain our hope in the waiting by reminding ourselves of the promises of God. John 14, I am leaving you with a gift. Peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. Remember what I told you. I'm going away, but I will come back to you again. They were waiting on a coming Messiah. The promise that had been made to them wasn't just about them being a great nation. The promise goes all the way back to Genesis when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. And in that moment, God gives the very first, the proto-evangelium, that he says, hey, serpent, you're going to crawl on the dirt. And guess what? Someday, the seed of the woman, you're going to bruise his heel, but he's going to crush your head. Very first prophecy that a Messiah was going to come and give victory over death and hell. Remind yourself of the promise. Jesus said, I'm going away, but I'm coming again. We are waiting. They were waiting on a coming Messiah. We are waiting on a returning Savior. And everything that we're going through in the midst of this, it pales in comparison to the weight of knowing that the glory of God is going to be shown. And that he's going to make all things new. And he's going to make every sad and terrible and broken thing in this world become untrue. And we're waiting. Deuteronomy 31:6, so be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic before them. For the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. Jesus said it, I will never leave you or forsake you. We maintain hope by remembering God's promises, and we strengthen our hope in the waiting by staying faithful. Strength is not found in running away, in abandoning and walking away. There were so many of the Israelites that had turned their back and said, it's not happening. God made this promise to us, but where is he? But they stayed faithful. Luke 1, 6 and 7, Zachariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes, careful to obey all the Lord's commands and regulations. They had no children, and they were both very old. They had been doing this faithfully all along. It also doesn't, they were both very old, but it doesn't say they got to a point where they retired from the service of God. They stayed faithful. We strengthen our hope by staying faithful, by continuing to serve. 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. God is looking for people who are committed so that He can strengthen them further. He is looking for those who are serving faithfully and maybe are even tired in it so that, oh, you're a prime candidate for God to come and strengthen you in your service. He's not looking for those who have laid out, those who have given up, those who have lost hope. He can't do anything with them, but those whose hearts are fully committed, He strengthens. And we strengthen our hope by staying faithful. Hebrews 10:23, let us hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, since He who promised is faithful. Don't lose hope. Strengthen your hope by staying faithful. See, don't miss this. When God spoke through the angel Gabriel in Luke chapter 1, He is breaking about a 400-year silence. If you read the Bible and you start in the Old Testament, you go all the way through and you get to the book of Malachi, the last book, and you finish Malachi and you turn the page, understand this, you've turned 400 years of history. God didn't speak. They were accustomed. They may not have always liked the message that came from God's prophets, but they were used to hearing from Him. And God goes silent. Can we even fathom 400 years? And when we think about our storied history as a nation, we're only here a couple hundred years. We think about, I've been waiting this my whole life. I'm 38. 400 years. God's silent. Deathly silent. In our day and age, Time magazine may put out a cover that says God is dead, but do you not think that there were people who were walking the streets of Jerusalem saying, I think our God's gone? No, remember the promise that He made? Remember everything? Yeah, but He hasn't done anything. In my lifetime, in my dad's lifetime, in my grandpa's lifetime. And not only that, they'd been invaded so many times. And then the Roman ruler Pompey invades Jerusalem, walks into the temple, walks into the Holy of Holies, the place where no man would go, walks into the Holy of Holies, touches the holy things of God that no man should touch, and guess what happens? Nothing. No. If you go in there and it's not your time, you're not the appointed one, you die, nothing. God is gone. Yahweh is no longer in existence. It's easy to believe that. But Zachariah and Elizabeth, when it was their week, they were on duty. They had hope when they shouldn't have had hope. They probably stopped telling people that they were still praying for children because they would have laughed. Come on, guys. This is getting sad. You're both old. It's not happening. It doesn't happen for everyone. And not just that. Guys, seriously, you're still going to the temple? For what? Your God hasn't done anything in hundreds of years. It's a dead religion. But Zechariah's name means God has remembered. Elizabeth's name means my God is abundance, or my God is my satisfaction. And finally, God breaks His silence, and He puts into action a plan that He had made long before they had ever lived. It began in Genesis 3. It carried on Isaiah 9. 6, for a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The Messiah was coming, and God breaks the silence and says, John is going to be born, and he's going to prepare the way for the Messiah. Because as this story concludes, the next part begins. And it's where we'll spend our time next week. Verse 26 of Luke 1. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And isn't this what it comes down to for all of us in the waiting? Will we give up hope, or will we hold on? Will we believe or stop believing? Do we continue to serve, or do we just go do something else? Do we give, or do we just spend our money like nothing really matters and there's nothing more to life than just consuming? Do we maintain our integrity, or do we just go with the flow because everyone else is? They seem to be doing whatever they want and getting away with it. Or we cling to hope in the waiting. Because in every generation, there was always a remnant that never lost hope, that always believed. And they would pass it on to their children, and they would continue to believe. They never stopped serving, and they never stopped giving, and they never stopped living for God. And even if we can't possibly imagine how God is going to come through for us, there's a bigger picture here. Jesus is returning for us. Even if we've prayed and prayed for the healing of a loved one and it hasn't come, know this: Jesus is coming, and he will make all things new. And he will bring ultimate healing. And if that's you and you feel like I've been praying and I've been waiting and I'm waiting, you're in good company, because that's what Christians have been doing all along. We have prayed and we have waited and we have hoped and we have believed, and we have seen God come through. Throughout the New Testament, they would write as though Jesus were coming back soon, and they died and didn't see it. But there was always a remnant who believed, and they passed it on. And we're that remnant today. That's us. We are entrusted with this. We're entrusted with the gospel message, with the task of reconciliation. So we must not lose hope. We must remember the promise. We must stay faithful. And Christmas, not just the day, the whole season, it's a reminder that your faith in God is not misplaced. That even when God is silent, it doesn't mean he's absent. That God has a plan, and that he is who he says he is, and he will always do what he says he will do. It's a reminder that our hope is not in vain. We've taken the title of this series from the song, "O Holy Night." There's a part of that song right at the beginning. It says this: long lay the world in sin and error pining. Pining, it's not really a word we use anymore much. I don't anyway. Some of you may. We don't really use the word pining. It means to wait, to long for. And really it means to wait and to long with a broken heart. God knows our brokenness. He has heard our prayers, and he is coming for us. This is the story before the story. It gets really good as God breaks his silence and hope is reborn in the hearts of people. And it still happens today. And Christmas is a season where, there's so much good about it. The tradition and the decoration and the family, it's all good. It's all good. But I hope that this year, as we wait 22 more days for it to get here, that every moment we'll be reminded that we're waiting on him to return. and he will keep his promise. Let's pray.